The camera flashes were blinding, illuminating the $10,000 silk wallpaper of the grand foyer. Eliza Vance stood calmly, a microphone clipped to her lapel, as 3 broadcast cameras aimed past her down the marble hallway. "He's on his way," a producer whispered. Eliza just nodded, her eyes fixed on the reinforced steel door at the end of the hall. Behind that door, a secret lay hidden. Tonight, her husband Arthur Vance was accepting the Philanthropist of the Year award in front of the entire city. But his greatest triumph was about to become his public execution, because Eliza had just brought the 6 o'clock news to their front door. Falcon's Crest was less a home and more a monument. Perched high on 80 acres of private woodland in Greenwich, Connecticut, the limestone mansion was a testament to the fortune of Arthur Vance, a tech baron who had, as the magazine said, digitized the modern world. His wife Eliza Vance was the other half of the power couple. She was old money, the heiress to a shipping fortune, and she provided the class, the lineage, and the philanthropic connections that Arthur craved. Their life was a meticulously curated performance. Mornings were spent in separate wings. Afternoons were for their respective boards, his corporate, hers charitable. Evenings were for display attending galas, where they smiled for cameras, their hands linked a perfect portrait of American success. The Vance Foundation, their joint passion project, was a behemoth funneling hundreds of millions into arts and education. But for Eliza, the gilt on her cage had begun to tarnish. It started subtly. Arthur, always ambitious, had become secretive. He was prone to locking himself in his study. But this was different. He had become possessive of the West Wing, an entire section of the 30,000-square-foot mansion that was ostensibly under renovation. "It's a surprise, darling," he'd said months ago, kissing her cheek. "A new gallery for your collection." But contractors never came. Instead, a specialized security team, men in dark suits who didn't speak, arrived. They worked for a week, and when they left, the West Wing was sealed by a thick, soundproofed steel door with a biometric fingerprint scanner. "Security upgrade," Arthur explained, annoyance in his voice when she pressed him. "After the data breach last quarter, I need a true SCIF, sensitive compartmented information facility, at home. You understand business." Eliza, who ran a multi-million-dollar charitable trust before she'd ever met him, bristled at the condescension. But she let it go. Then the glitches began. The house accounts, which Eliza's assistant Julian monitored, started showing anomalies. Weekly deliveries from Petrosian Caviar. Cases of a specific boutique vodka, Beluga Gold line, that neither of them drank. High-end lingerie from La Perla in a size 0. Eliza was a size 6. "Must be a clerical error, Julian," Eliza said, frowning at the invoice. "Have accounting fix it." "I tried Mrs. Vance," Julian replied, his brow furrowed. "They said all charges were authorized by Mr. Vance, personally coded to West Wing Security Protocol. It's a black budget line." A chill, cold and sharp, ran down Eliza's spine. A black budget. In her own home. That night she waited for Arthur in the grand library. He came in late, smelling of expensive whiskey and the faint, sweet scent of a perfume she didn't recognize. It wasn't the usual musky Tom Ford he preferred. This was light floral. Fracas. "You're late," she said, her voice neutral. "Bored dinner, darling. You know how it is." He loosened his $500 Brioni tie, not meeting her eye. "I'm heading up. Don't wait." He walked past her, heading not towards their master bedroom, but towards the West Wing. She heard the soft whir of the biometric scanner, the heavy thud of the vacuum-sealed door. Eliza stood alone in the cavernous library, the silence of the massive house suddenly feeling oppressive. He hadn't just gone to his secure office to work. He had gone there to sleep. She walked to the bar to pour herself a glass of water, and her hand trembled. The house was no longer a monument. It was a prison, and she had the sickening feeling that she was not the only one inside it. The next few weeks were a descent into a quiet, paranoid hell. Eliza began to move through her own home like a ghost observing. She was the mistress of Falcon's Crest, yet she was an intruder in a significant portion of it. She noted the patterns. Arthur would spend 2 or 3 nights a week in the master suite, with her performing the role of the attentive husband. On those nights he was charming, apologetic for his workload, and praised her efforts with the upcoming Vance Foundation Gala. He was, by all accounts, the perfect man. Then there were the other nights, the West Wing nights. On these nights he would claim a transcontinental deadline or a secure video call with the Tokyo board. He would retreat behind the steel door, and Eliza would be left alone in their cavernous bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening. The house was old, built in the 1920s, and retrofitted with modern tech. But the bones were old. The ductwork, the ventilation shafts. They were original. One night, unable to sleep, Eliza found herself in the hallway adjacent to the West Wing. She pressed her ear to the cold plaster wall. At first, nothing. Just the low hum of the servers Arthur kept. But then she heard it. It wasn't a business call. It was laughter. A high, silvery laugh, quickly shushed. Then music. Not the classical or jazz Arthur tolerated, but something modern, pulsing with a low bass. She felt the blood drain from her face. Her suspicions turned to the staff. The household was run by Beatrice, a stern older woman who had been with Eliza's family for 30 years. Beatrice was loyal, unflappable, and saw everything. Lately, Beatrice had been avoiding Eliza's gaze. Her hands, usually so steady when pouring tea, trembled. Eliza found her in the main kitchen, long after the rest of the staff had gone home. Beatrice was scrubbing a countertop that was already pristine. "Beatrice," Eliza said softly. The older woman jumped, dropping the sponge. "Mrs. Vance, you startled me. What is going on in the West Wing?" Eliza's voice was not accusatory. It was tired. Beatrice's face, usually a mask of professional calm, crumpled. I don't know what you mean, ma'am. Mr. Vance's private work. Beatrice, you've known me since I was a girl," Eliza said, stepping closer. "Those invoices from Petrosian. The La Perla boxes, the Beluga vodka. They aren't for Mr. Vance, and they certainly aren't for me." Beatrice looked down her shoulders, shaking. "He made me sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. He said if I ever spoke of it, he would ruin my son." Eliza's blood ran cold. Beatrice's son, David, had recently received a prestigious, fully funded fellowship at a medical research lab, a lab that received significant anonymous funding from the Vance Foundation. It wasn't a fellowship. It was leverage. "He is threatening you," Eliza stated, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Beatrice finally looked up, and her eyes were filled with tears of shame and fear. "He brings me the trays. I am to leave them outside the service elevator that connects to the wing. He told me if I ever tried to use the elevator myself, the police would be called. He said it was for a long-term consultant working on a sensitive project." "A consultant?" Eliza repeated the word, tasting like ash. "Do you know her name?" I only saw her once," Beatrice whispered, crossing herself. "Weeks ago. He was bringing her in through the underground garage. She's young, ma'am. Very young. Blonde. I heard him call her Chloe. Chloe, the name echoed in the vast, empty kitchen. Eliza knew a Chloe. Chloe Benson, a former intern at the foundation, a bright, ambitious girl from a poor background, barely 23. Eliza had personally mentored her, impressed by her drive. She had even written her letter of recommendation for business school. The sense of betrayal was so profound, so complete, it left Eliza breathless. It wasn't just infidelity, it was a violation. Arthur hadn't just brought a mistress into their home. He had chosen someone from Eliza's own world, a girl she had tried to help. And he was using their foundation, their legacy as a tool to blackmail her most trusted servant. Eliza put a steadying hand on Beatrice's shoulder. "This is not your fault, Beatrice. You will not lose your son, but I need you to do exactly as I say. Continue to bring the trays. Continue to say nothing. But from now on, you report to me." Beatrice nodded, wiping her eyes. What are you going to do, Mrs. Vance?" Eliza's expression hardened. The shock had passed, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This was not a domestic dispute. This was a war. He wants to call his wing a sensitive, compartmented information facility. Eliza said, her voice dropping to a steely whisper. "Fine. I'm going to treat it like one. I'm going to find out exactly what sensitive information he's hiding." Eliza did not cry. She did not scream. She went to her study in the East Wing, a room of old mahogany and leather-bound books from her father, and she made 2 calls. The first was to Julian, her assistant. "Julian," she said, her voice crisp, "I need you to find every piece of communication between my husband and a Chloe Benson former intern. Check foundation servers, check email archives, everything. And Julian, use the encrypted hard line. Assume everything else is monitored." The second call was to a name she had kept in her father's old Rolodex for years. A break glass in case of emergency contact. "Morrison Investigations. How can I help you?" "This is Eliza Vance," she said. "I need to retain Mr. Morrison. Immediately." Daniel Morrison was not the kind of PI found in pulp novels. He was a former FBI white-collar crimes agent, a man who specialized in high-stakes financial forensics and discreet surveillance. He wore bespoke suits and spoke in quiet, measured tones. He met Eliza not at the mansion but in a private suite at the St. Regis Hotel in Manhattan. Eliza laid it out. The secret wing. The terrified housekeeper. The name, Chloe Benson. "I assume you want divorce-related surveillance, Mrs. Vance," Morrison said, making notes in a small leather book. "Proof of infidelity for the settlement." "No, Mr. Morrison," Eliza said, leaning forward. "My prenup is ironclad. I don't need proof of adultery. The irreconcilable differences clause is sufficient. What I need to know is why. Why in my home? Why threaten my staff? Why this level of secrecy for a simple, tawdry affair? Arthur is arrogant, but he's not stupid. This feels like something more." Morrison looked at her, impressed. "You think the girl is leverage, that someone is blackmailing him? It's the only thing that makes sense. Or, he's blackmailing her." Morrison agreed to take the case. His fee was astronomical. Eliza paid it without blinking. "I need 2 things," she instructed. "First, 24/7 surveillance on the mansion. I want to know every person and every delivery that goes in or out. Second, a full financial workup on Arthur Vance and Chloe Benson for the last 6 months. I want to know where every single dollar is going." "Understood," Morrison said. "We'll be invisible." While Morrison's team set up, Eliza returned to Falcon's Crest, and played the part of the devoted wife, finalizing details for the Foundation's Night of Light gala. It was their biggest event of the year, where Arthur was set to receive the prestigious Philanthropist of the Year award. The irony was so bitter, it almost choked her. A week later, Morrison called for another meeting. The St. Regis same suite. He laid out a series of photographs on the polished mahogany table. They were grainy, long-lens shots. One showed Chloe Benson, not in the mansion, but on a rare outing. She was in a black Mercedes Maybach, registered to a shell corps being driven to a private office building in Stamford. "We tailed her," Morrison said. "She doesn't leave the mansion often. Maybe once a week, always at night. She's taken to this building. She goes inside for exactly 1 hour, then returns to your estate." "What's in the building?" Eliza asked. "A private bank, Helvetia Private Trust. Very discreet. Very Swiss." Morrison then laid down a second folder. This one contained spreadsheets, wire transfer records, and incorporation documents. "This is where it gets complicated, Mrs. Vance," Morrison said, his voice grim. "Your husband isn't just spending money on Miss Benson. He's moving money through her." Eliza stared at the documents. She saw Chloe Benson's name listed as the sole director of 3 different LLCs, all registered in Delaware. She saw a series of complex wire transfers, moving in increments just under the 10,000 reporting threshold. The money was coming from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. But the origin of that money? Morrison pointed to a flagged transfer from 3 months prior. "This," Morrison said, "is a $20 million donation made to the Vance Foundation. It came from a tech conglomerate that just won a massive government contract. A contract Arthur's lobbying firm helped secure. The donation was clean. But look here." He traced a line. 2 weeks after the $20 million landed in the Foundation's account, a new initiative was funded, the Digital Futures Grant. That grant, in the amount of $5 million, was awarded to a newly formed non-profit based in the Caymans. That non-profit vehicle, Morrison said, is a shell. From there, the money was laundered, broken up, and transferred to the LLCs controlled by Chloe Benson. She then visits the private bank in Stamford to, well, we can only assume she's moving it into tangible, untraceable assets. Gold, bearer bonds, perhaps diamonds. Eliza felt the floor drop out from under her. This wasn't an affair. This was a conspiracy. Arthur wasn't just cheating on her. He was stealing from their own foundation. He was using their philanthropy, her life's work, as a personal piggy bank. The West Wing wasn't a love nest. It was a high-security holding cell and a criminal's office. He was hiding Chloe Benson in their mansion, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. He couldn't risk his co-conspirator walking around talking to people or getting spooked. He had her locked in a gilded cage, feeding her caviar and La Perla to keep her compliant while she helped him drain their legacy. "My God," Eliza whispered, sinking into a chair. The betrayal was absolute. He wasn't just destroying their marriage. He was destroying the one good thing they had built together. Morrison waited a moment before speaking. "Mrs. Vance, this is no longer a divorce proceeding. This is a federal crime. Embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy. We need to take this to the SEC, to the FBI." Eliza looked up, and the look in her eyes was one Morrison had seen before in boardrooms and in interrogation rooms. It was the look of someone who had just lost everything and therefore had nothing left to lose. "No," she said, her voice shaking with a cold fury. "Not yet. The FBI will seize his assets. This will be tied up in litigation for a decade. The foundation will be destroyed in the scandal. The people who depend on it will suffer." "What are you suggesting?" Morrison asked. "I'm suggesting," Eliza said, standing up, "that he's not the only one who knows how to move assets. The gala is in 3 days. He's expecting an award. He's expecting applause." She walked to the window, looking down at the New York City skyline. "He wants to be in the spotlight, fine. I'll build him the biggest stage in the world. Call Julian. Tell him to liquidate my personal holdings, all of them, and get me a meeting with Camilla Croft at Global News Network. If my husband wants to put on a performance, I'll make sure he has an audience." The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a sea of black tie and diamonds. The Night of Light Gala was the crowning achievement of the New York social season, and tonight it was all in honor of Arthur Vance. Banners bearing his handsome, smiling face hung from the vaulted ceilings. Eliza on his arm was a vision in a midnight blue Oscar de la Renta gown. She smiled for the cameras, her hand resting perfectly in the crook of his elbow. She was the picture of the proud, supportive wife. "You look breathtaking tonight, darling," Arthur murmured, kissing her temple as the flashbulbs popped. "Truly. Are you feeling better?" "Much better," Eliza replied, her smile never wavering. She had spent the last 48 hours claiming a vicious migraine, locking herself in the East Wing to coordinate with Morrison Julian and her new high-powered legal team. "Good. It's a big night for us," he said, squeezing her hand. "It's a big night for you, Arthur," she corrected gently. "I'm just so proud." Inside, the party was in full swing. Senators, artists, and billionaires mingled under the soft glow of the chandeliers. Eliza moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting congratulations. All the while, her mind was a steel trap of logistics. Julian was not at the gala. He was in a parked van 2 blocks away, monitoring communications. Morrison was also not at the gala. He and a 3-man technical extraction team were parked in a black landscaping van on a service road just outside the walls of Falcon's Crest. Beatrice, having been given the night off, was safely installed in a suite at the St. Regis with a bonus in her account large enough to buy her a new house. At 9:00 p.m., Arthur took to the stage to a thunderous standing ovation. The mayor of New York City presented him with the Philanthropist of the Year award. "I am humbled." Arthur began, his voice thick with false emotion. He placed the crystal trophy on the podium. "But I cannot accept this award as an individual. This is for my team, for the people we help, and most of all, this is for my incredible wife, Eliza." He gestured to her at the head table. The spotlight swung to her. Eliza stood, placed her hand over her heart, and smiled, a single perfect tear rolling down her cheek. The room awed. "Her heart, her compassion," Arthur continued, "is the engine of the Vance Foundation. She teaches me every day about the true meaning of integrity, of transparency, and of family. Eliza, my love, this is for you." The applause was deafening. As Arthur soaked in the adoration, Eliza discreetly checked the Cartier watch on her wrist. 9:15 p.m. "Go time," she murmured, undetected. 2 blocks away, Julian typed a command into his laptop. In Greenwich, the entire security grid for Falcon's Crest, except for the West Wing, went dead. The alarms, the cameras, the motion sensors, all of it disabled by the master codes Beatrice had provided. Morrison's team, dressed in black, scaled the perimeter wall and moved silently across the lawn converging on the West Wing service entrance. They had 1 hour, at 9:30 p.m. Eliza stood up from the table. She leaned over to the mayor's wife. "I'm just so overcome," she whispered, dabbing her eye. "I need a moment in the powder room." "Of course, dear. He's a wonderful man," the woman replied, patting her hand. Eliza walked out of the grand ballroom. She did not go to the powder room. She walked down the hall through a side exit and into the cool night air where a black Cadillac Escalade was waiting engine running. She got in the back. "Are we ready, Camilla?" Eliza asked. Camilla Croft, the sharpest investigative journalist in the country, sat across from her, a microphone in her hand. A broadcast team was packed into the vehicle with them. "Live feed is secure," Camilla said, her eyes glinting. "The network has cleared a 15-minute interruption of all programming. This is the biggest exclusive of my career, Eliza. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this?" Eliza looked back at the glowing facade of the museum, where her husband was currently the king of the world. "He built his kingdom on my family's name and on the money of people he deceived," Eliza said, her voice ice cold. She turned to Camilla. "I'm not just exposing him. I'm taking it all back. Drive." The Escalade, followed by a live broadcast satellite van, pulled into traffic sirens on racing north to Greenwich. The 40-minute drive to Falcon's Crest was a blur of flashing lights. Eliza sat perfectly still, her phone in her hand, monitoring 2 separate text threads. Thread 1. Julian. Team is at the West Wing service door, cutting the secondary fiber line now. Julian West Wing is now dark. No internet, no cell service, no external comms. She's on an isolated grid. Thread 2. Morrison. M. We are at the biometric panel. It's a commercial-grade S9 system. Tough. We are using the duress code Beatrice provided. M code failed. He must have changed it. M going to plan B. Breaching the hinges. This will not be quiet. ETA 10 minutes. Eliza's heart hammered. Plan B. Back at the gala. Arthur would be finishing his speech, mingling, accepting congratulations. He wouldn't check his phone for at least another 20 minutes. The window was impossibly tight. The convoy screeched to a halt at the massive wrought-iron gates of Falcon's Crest. They were wide open, deactivated by Julian. The Escalade and the 2 Global News Network vans drove straight up the winding, manicured driveway. They parked on the grand cobblestone courtyard in front of the mansion. The front doors were unlocked. "Eliza, this is it," Camilla said, clipping Eliza's microphone to her gown. "Camera 1 is on you. Camera 2 follows you. We are live to the nation in 30 seconds. 10, Eliza said, looking at her watch. "Start the feed now." "We're live," the producer yelled. Camilla Croft looked directly into the camera, her face serious. "Good evening. We are interrupting our regular programming for a breaking news story. We are live at Falcon's Crest, the Greenwich estate of billionaire Arthur Vance, who just moments ago accepted the Philanthropist of the Year award in New York." The camera panned to Eliza standing elegant and poised in her ball gown, the magnificent dark mansion looming behind her. "With me is his wife, Eliza Vance," Camilla continued. "Mrs. Vance, you have claimed there is a far darker story behind the Vance Foundation's success. You've brought us here tonight. Why? Good evening, Camilla." Eliza said, her voice clear and steady, betraying no tremor. "For the last 6 months, my husband has been running a criminal operation from inside our home. He has been systematically embezzling millions of dollars from our own foundation. money intended for scholarships for medical research and for the arts. In the network's control room, producers watched their ratings monitors explode. "Those are shocking allegations, Mrs. Vance," Camilla said, playing her part. "Do you have proof our home is a crime?" "I'm seen," Eliza said, turning and walking towards the front door. The camera followed her. "And the lead conspirator is currently locked inside. Follow me." Eliza moved through her own home as if it were a foreign country. The foyer, the grand hall, the gallery. The cameras captured the obscene wealth, the Rodin sculptures, the Rothko paintings. "This part of the house," Eliza narrated, "is the East Wing, my home. But the West Wing, that is my husband's private domain. He told me it was a secure facility for his work. He lied." They reached the reinforced steel door. It was sealed. From the other side, they could hear a faint, metallic thudding. Morrison and his team were there working on the hinges with a plasma torch. "Mr. Morrison," Eliza addressed him, "please update us." Morrison, his face masked, didn't look up from his work. "Mrs. Vance, the occupant has activated the internal deadbolts. She knows we're here." "Who is she?" Camilla asked, pushing the microphone forward. "Her name is Chloe Benson," Eliza said, staring into the camera lens. "A former intern at our foundation. My husband isn't just hiding a mistress, Camilla. He's hiding his accountant. She is the one who has been creating the shell companies, forging the documents and laundering the money he's been stealing." The thudding from inside stopped. A moment later, a high-pitched, terrified scream echoed from behind the steel. "Arthur! Arthur, they're here. They're trying to get in. Help me." "She's trying to call him," Eliza said calmly. "But we've cut the signal. He can't help her now." Back at the Met, Arthur Vance was shaking hands, his face beaming. His phone in his pocket remained silent. "The hinges are compromised," Morrison yelled over the roar of the torch. "Stand back. Breaching." With a groan of tortured metal, the multi-million-dollar security door was ripped from its frame. It crashed to the marble floor with a sound like a thunderclap. The cameras rushed forward, pushing into the darkness. The air that rushed out of the West Wing was stale thick with the smell of expensive perfume old food and an acrid, burning odor. "Get the lights," a cameraman yelled. Powerful broadcast lights flooded the suite, revealing a scene of utter chaos. This was no elegant guest room. It was a high-tech bunker that had been turned into a hoarder's nest. Piles of La Perla boxes and empty caviar jars were stacked next to towers of blinking computer servers. A king-sized bed, unmade, was covered in spreadsheets, and in the far corner by a small smoking fireplace stood Chloe Benson. She was not the glamorous mistress one might imagine. She was a terrified-looking young woman in silk pajamas. Her hair matted her eyes wide with panic. In her hands, she clutched a heavy-duty document shredder, feeding papers into it as fast as she could. A small pile of charred documents smoldered in the fireplace. "Get those cameras out of here," she shrieked, shielding her face. "You have no right, Arthur. Arthur." "Chloe," Eliza said, her voice cutting through the hysteria. The cameras focused on her as she stepped over the threshold, her Oscar de la Renta gown sweeping across the ruined floor. Chloe froze, recognizing the voice. She lowered her arm, her face a mask of disbelief and hatred. You did this. You did this to yourself, Chloe," Eliza said, her voice devoid of pity. "Did you really think this would last forever? Living in my house, stealing money from children's charities, all while hiding behind a steel door. You don't know anything." Chloe spat, her fear turning to venom. "Arthur loves me. He was going to leave you. He was just waiting for the right time. Did he tell you that before or after he asked you to commit federal wire fraud? Eliza countered, walking deeper into the room. She picked up a ledger from the desk. 3 Delaware LLCs, Helvetia Private Trust, moving foundation money to the Caymans. This is very impressive work, Chloe. You learned a lot during your internship. Camilla Croft and her cameraman were capturing every second. This was gold. Mrs. Vance, Camilla interjected. What are we looking at here? This looks like an office. It's the real Vance Foundation headquarters, Eliza said bitterly, holding the ledger up for the camera. This is where the money really goes. Not to art programs, but to this. She pointed to an open laptop which showed a jeweler's website. On the screen was a 30-carat yellow diamond ring, price on request. He was buying that for me, Chloe whispered, her delusion cracking. As a bonus. He was buying your silence, Eliza said, and the entire time he had you locked in here like a veal. You haven't seen the sun in weeks, have you? He told you it was for your safety. He told you I was unstable. The truth is, you were his prisoner and his accomplice. The realization dawned on Chloe's face, a slow-motion collapse of her entire fantasy. She wasn't the co-conspirator. She was just the scapegoat, the one who signed all the documents, the one who would be left holding the bag. She sank to the floor, the shredder falling from her hands. He promised, she sobbed. He promised me everything. He lied, Eliza said simply. Just then a phone buzzed. It wasn't Eliza's, it was a burner phone on the desk. The signal which Julian had just reactivated was flooding in. The phone lit up with dozens of missed calls and frantic texts, all from Arthur. The king had finally left his castle. He's here, Morrison said, his voice low. Eliza turned back to the cameras, her face a perfect tragic mask. My husband. He's just received his award for Philanthropist of the Year. I believe he's just arrived home. I think it's time he was properly congratulated. She walked out of the ruined wing, past the destroyed door, and back into the main foyer, the cameras following her every step. Arthur Vance didn't use the door. He burst into the foyer from the garage entrance like a bull, his face purple with rage. He was still in his tuxedo, his Philanthropist of the Year pin glinting on his lapel. He had clearly broken every speed limit, from Manhattan to Greenwich. "Eliza!" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the marble. "What is the meaning of this? What have you done?" He stopped dead. The foyer was filled with broadcast equipment, lights, technicians, and at the center of it all, standing by the grand staircase, was his wife, flanked by Camilla Croft and 2 live cameras. He saw the destroyed West Wing door down the hall. He heard the sobbing of his mistress. He saw the red live light on the camera. His entire world, his reputation, his freedom, his fortune evaporated in a single, horrifying instant. "Arthur," Eliza said, her voice dangerously calm. "You're home. We were just airing some of the Foundation's dirty laundry. Literally." "Turn those cameras off," Arthur growled, taking a menacing step forward. "Turn them off now. This is private property. You are all trespassing." "On the contrary, Mr. Vance?" Camilla Croft stepped forward, holding her microphone like a weapon. "We were invited by your wife, the co-owner of this property and co-chair of the Vance Foundation. We've been broadcasting a very interesting story about your creative accounting." These are lies, slander, Arthur yelled, his eyes wild. He looked at Eliza, his expression a mixture of pure hatred and desperation. Eliza, stop this. Stop this right now. We can talk about this. Whatever she's paying you. He snarled at Camilla. I'll double it. This isn't for sale, Mr. Vance, Camilla said coolly. Eliza, please. He begged, his tone shifting. He was the actor again. The charming, desperate husband. Darling, you're not well. You've been under so much stress. Let's get these people out of here and talk. He tried to reach for her to play the part of the concerned husband managing his unstable wife. Eliza didn't flinch. She didn't move. She simply looked at him. The gaslighting is over, Arthur, she said, her voice amplified by the microphone. The performance is done. You built an empire on lies, and you did it using my name. You used our foundation as your personal slush fund, and you imprisoned a young woman in our home to do your dirty work, all while accepting awards for your integrity. She took a step towards him, and for the first time he took a step back. You underestimated me, Eliza said, her voice low and vibrating with a power he had never heard before. You thought I was just a socialite, a decoration. You thought I was too stupid or too weak to see what was happening in my own home. That was your final, fatal mistake. You bitch. He hissed, his mask completely gone. You'll get nothing. I'll destroy you for this. I'll have my lawyers. Your lawyers are busy, Eliza said. As of 9:30 p.m. tonight, Julian, acting on my authority as co-chair, executed a key person clause in the Foundation's charter. You have been removed from the board, effective immediately. As for your personal assets, I filed for divorce this afternoon, along with an emergency injunction to freeze every account you hold. The accounts Chloe didn't know about anyway. Arthur's face went white. He was ruined, utterly and completely. And as for the law, Eliza continued, I believe they're here for you. As if on cue, the sound of new sirens filled the air. But these weren't the ones Arthur had used. These were official. 2 dark sedans and a Greenwich police car pulled up the drive, their blue and red lights flooding the foyer. Daniel Morrison stepped forward, holding up his badge, followed by 2 men in dark suits. Arthur Vance, Morrison said, his voice booming in the suddenly silent hall. I'm Agent Miller, FBI, White Collar Crime Division. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and embezzlement. Please put your hands behind your back. Arthur Vance, the philanthropist of the year, stared at his wife as the FBI agents cuffed him. He said nothing. His face was a void. He had been so busy building a cage for his mistress that he never realized his wife was building one for him. As they led him out, he stopped and looked at Eliza one last time. It was all for you, you know, he whispered, a final pathetic attempt. All of it. The money. The power. Eliza met his gaze. You're right, Arthur. It was all for me. And I'm keeping it. She watched as they placed him in the back of the car, right next to a sobbing, handcuffed Chloe Benson. The cameras captured it all, the fall of the king and his pawn broadcast live to a shocked and horrified nation. The arrest was merely the end of the beginning. What followed was not a simple divorce, but a financial war fought by armies of lawyers. Arthur, out on bail and facing a federal indictment, was furious and formidable. He hired the most ruthless legal team in New York, determined to drag Eliza through the mud and prove she was an unfit, vindictive spouse who had illegally entreated him. What he failed to realize was that Eliza wasn't just planning her escape. She was planning a hostile takeover of her own life. While Arthur's lawyers were busy filing motions about the illegal media ambush, Eliza's team was quietly executing the brilliant multi-pronged strategy she had formulated in the days leading up to the gala. The first move had been the key person clause. It was an obscure piece of the Vance Foundation's bylaws inserted by Eliza's father's lawyers when it was first established. It stated that if one of the two key persons, Arthur or Eliza, was found to be acting in a way that caused catastrophic reputational or financial harm to the foundation, the other had the unilateral power to suspend their voting rights and access to funds pending a full board review. By providing the board with Morrison's preliminary evidence of embezzlement just hours before the gala, Eliza had legally and quietly seized control. The second move was financial. Arthur had hidden his stolen money, but Eliza had hidden her money in plain sight. For years, she had been diverting the profits from her own premarital shipping assets, not into cash, but into tangible, untraceable assets, art. While Arthur was buying shell companies, Eliza was buying a portfolio of impressionist paintings and blue-chip contemporary art. Her black budget wasn't for caviar. It was for a Monet, a de Kooning, and a Basquiat. These were stored not at Falcon's Crest, but in secure, climate-controlled free ports in Geneva and Singapore. The morning after the arrest, as Arthur's lawyers tried to freeze her assets, they found her bank accounts nearly empty. She had already liquidated the art. A $300 million private sale, executed by Sotheby's private sales division, had cleared just 24 hours earlier. She had become, in a single day, one of the most liquid billionaires in the country. She used that money as a weapon. First, she fully recapitalized the Vance Foundation, paying back every dollar Arthur had stolen with interest. This single move stunned the philanthropic world and, more importantly, the U.S. Attorney's Office. It showed her intent was to save the foundation, not just punish her husband. Second, she set up a legal defense fund for Beatrice, ensuring the housekeeper who had helped her was protected by a team of lawyers as ruthless as Arthur's. When Arthur's team tried to paint Beatrice as an unreliable, disgruntled employee, Eliza's lawyers provided the court with the NDA. Arthur had forced her to sign, as well as proof that he was leveraging her son's medical fellowship. The charge against Beatrice was dropped, and Arthur was hit with an additional charge of witness tampering. Third, she dealt with Chloe Benson. The U.S. attorney offered Chloe a deal: testify against Arthur, detail the entire fraud, and get a reduced sentence. Chloe, facing 30 years, immediately agreed. She handed over every ledger, every password, and every damning voice memo she had secretly recorded of Arthur. The Mistress, the woman Arthur thought was a disposable pawn, had become the prosecution's star witness. Eliza, meanwhile, was dismantling Arthur's public image piece by piece. She gave a second exclusive interview to Camilla Croft. This time, she wasn't the avenging wife. She was the reborn philanthropist. She announced she was dissolving the Vance Foundation and relaunching it under her maiden name, the Eliza Creighton Trust. Its new sole mission: to provide legal and financial aid to victims of high-stakes financial abuse and economic gaslighting. She turned her personal trauma into a global brand. She was no longer just Eliza Vance, the wronged wife. She was Eliza Creighton, the advocate. The trial of Arthur Vance was not just a legal proceeding. It was the social execution of the decade. The downtown Manhattan Federal Courthouse became a daily circus. Satellite trucks lined Worth Street, and a roiling crowd of media protesters and morbidly curious onlookers gathered every morning held back by police barricades. Tabloids had a field day, branding Eliza the Ice Queen or the Righteous Avenger, depending on the editorial slant. Inside the courtroom was a standing-room-only pressure cooker. Arthur Vance, out on a bail so high it was record-setting, arrived each day in his perfect bespoke suits, a different somber tie for each appearance. But the charm was gone. The performance was over. He looked gaunt, haunted, a thin veneer of indignation barely covering the raw panic beneath. He was a king without a kingdom, and the public was there to watch the guillotine. The prosecution's case, led by a shark-like assistant U.S. attorney, was methodical, brutal, and technologically sophisticated. They presented Morrison's surveillance showing the secret deliveries and the timeline of Chloe's imprisonment. They walked the jury through the labyrinthine bank records from the Caymans and Delaware, displaying the flow of embezzled money with damning, easy-to-understand charts. But the star witness, the one who broke the case wide open, was Chloe Benson. She was brought in from protective custody, looking nothing like the intern Eliza had once known, nor the high-strung mistress from the West Wing. Dressed in an ill-fitting grey suit, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, she looked like what she was, a terrified young woman who had been completely broken. In a voice that was often barely a whisper, she detailed her entire relationship with Arthur. She spoke of his initial charm, the mentorship that quickly turned intimate, the promises of a future together. She recounted the day he told her they needed to protect their assets from his unstable wife. He told me it was a game. Chloe testified, tears streaming down her face as she avoided looking at Arthur. He said it was us against the world. He made me sign the incorporation papers telling me they were love letters, proof that he was building a new life for me. For us. When he moved me into the wing, he said it was for our safety, that Eliza was having him followed. It wasn't until the door locked, and he was the only one who could open it, that I realized it wasn't a love nest. It was a vault. As she spoke, Arthur stared at her, his jaw clenching and unclenching. He vibrated with a silent rage, trying to catch her eye, to intimidate her one last time. But she never looked at him. She just looked at the jury, her shame and regret palpable. The prosecution's final witness was Eliza. Her arrival each day was its own event. She wore no black, no mourning colors. She wore tailored, powerful suits in shades of ivory, cobalt blue, and firm gray. It was armor. She walked through the media gauntlet without looking left or right, her face calm and assured. When she took the stand, the entire room held its breath. She was poised, articulate, and utterly immovable. Her testimony was a masterclass in precision. She laid out the financial discrepancies. She first noticed her hiring of Morrison, and the final horrifying discovery of the Foundation's systemic bleeding. Then it was the defense's turn. Arthur's lead attorney, a bulldog named Martin Harris, whose fee was famously $1 million per day of trial, approached the stand. His strategy was clear: if you can't beat the facts, destroy the witness. Mrs. Vance, or should I say Miss Creighton, he began, his voice dripping with condescension. Quite a show you put on. Is it true you orchestrated a media ambush, a live broadcast storming of your own home, complete with television cameras? It is true, Eliza said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the room, that I invited journalists to be independent third-party witnesses as I uncovered a federal crime in progress. I was advised that given my husband's power, transparency was my only protection. Protection or publicity? Harris shot back. "Weren't you just angry? Mrs. Vance, furious, scorned your husband was in love with a younger, more beautiful woman. This whole charade, the cameras, the FBI, it was all just the revenge of a jealous wife." The courtroom murmured. Eliza waited for the silence. "Mr. Harris," she said, leaning forward just slightly. "My husband's infidelity was a deep personal disappointment. His decision to systematically steal over $20 million from a children's cancer research fund, that was a public and moral atrocity. I acted accordingly." The jealous wife narrative evaporated. Harris, furious, changed tactics. "You speak of acting. You acted like a vigilante. You bypassed the police. You bypassed the FBI. You set up your own breach. I contacted the FBI the moment I had incontrovertible proof," Eliza countered smoothly. "Agent Miller, who you see sitting right there, was fully apprised. They were in fact waiting for my signal. What you call a vigilante act, the prosecution calls a citizen's cooperation in a pre-planned sting operation." Harris was losing, and he knew it. He went for a final desperate blow. "You're a financial predator yourself, aren't you, Isum? Is it true, Ms. Creighton, that in the 24 hours before your husband's arrest, you secretly liquidated over $300 million in assets? Art, wasn't it? You were stealing from him, draining the marital accounts before he could stop you." This was the moment. The entire jury leaned in. Eliza met his gaze, her own filled with a cold pity. "Mr. Harris, as you well know from the prenup, which your client signed and which has been entered into evidence, all art purchased with my premarital inherited funds remains my sole separate property. I did not drain marital accounts. I leveraged my own. For what? To flee, to build your own empire?" "No," Eliza said, and her voice now carried the weight of a CEO, not a wife. "I liquidated those assets for a very specific purpose. The following morning, I made a $20 million donation to the Vance Foundation to cover the exact amount your client stole. I then created a $50 million stabilization fund to pay the salaries of the 200 employees whose jobs your client put at risk. And finally, I used it to establish the Creighton Trust, which will now in perpetuity provide legal and financial aid to victims of high-stakes financial abuse. Yes, Mr. Harris, I was planning. I was planning to save my life's work from the man who was supposed to be my partner." She had not just answered the question, she had delivered her own closing argument. Harris, his face pale, looked at the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." The closing arguments were a formality. The prosecution painted Arthur as a sociopathic predator who wore a mask of philanthropy to hide a heart of pure greed. The defense made a weak, rambling case about a marriage gone wrong and a vindictive woman's elaborate setup. The jury was out for less than 2 hours on the charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud in the case of the United States for Arthur Vance. How do you find guilty? The word struck. Arthur, who had been staring at the table, flinched as if he'd been shot. On the charge of embezzlement from a charitable organization, guilty. On the charge of witness tampering, guilty. 12 counts, 12 resounding guilties. Arthur Vance sank in his chair, his face the color of ash. Eliza watched her face a perfect tragic mask. She felt no joy, no triumph, just the profound hollow ache of a necessary amputation. At the sentencing hearing a week later, the judge was scathing. "Mr. Vance," he said, looking down from the bench, "you were a man who had everything. Wealth, respect, a partner who was your equal in intellect and generosity. You squandered it all. You preyed on the vulnerable, on a young, impressionable employee, on the public who trusted your foundation, and on the sick children who were the beneficiaries of that trust. It is the judgment of this court that your extreme arrogance and calculated predatory nature, masked by an obscene abuse of public trust, warrants the most significant penalty. I sentence you to 25 years in a federal prison. For Chloe Benson, her cooperation and testimony earned her leniency 18 months in a minimum security facility and 500 hours of community service. As the marshals moved to cuff him, Arthur, his $5,000 suit rumpled, looked at Eliza one last time. His eyes were not pleading. They were not apologetic. They were black with a venomous, bottomless hatred. He said nothing, but his look was a final, silent curse. Eliza met his gaze unflinching. She held it until he turned away, a broken, defeated man, being led to his cage. She stood and walked out of the courthouse, past the throng of cameras that erupted at her appearance. She didn't stop to give a statement. She got into the back of her waiting car. As it pulled into the anonymity of New York traffic, the Ice Queen finally let her armor fall. She leaned her head against the cool glass, and for the first time in a year, she allowed herself to cry. Not for him, not for the marriage. She cried for the woman she had been forced to become, and for the profound, terrifying, and absolute relief of the woman she was now finally free to be. The war was over. Falcon's Crest was seized by the federal government and sold at auction. The proceeds were all folded back into the victims' compensation fund. Eliza, now known only as Eliza Creighton, never set foot in the house again. She moved into a sleek modern penthouse overlooking Central Park. Her new life and the vital work of the Creighton Trust was just beginning. The story of Eliza and Arthur Vance isn't just a tool of infidelity. It's a raw look at how power, greed, and arrogance can build a prison, even in the most luxurious mansion. Arthur Vance thought he was untouchable, that his money and his charm made him invincible. He built a steel-doored cage for his secrets, but he forgot that the woman he underestimated was the one who held the master key all along. Eliza's story is a chilling reminder that the brightest spotlights often cast the darkest shadows, and that true justice isn't just about exposing a lie, but about having the courage to rebuild a more powerful truth in its place. What did you think of Eliza's ultimate plan? Was it brilliant justice or cold-blooded revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories where the truth always comes out, make sure to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible true-life dramas every single week. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Have you ever had a moment where the floor just falls out from under you? 1 second you're standing on what you think is solid ground, and the next you're in a free fall with nothing to grab onto. For Clara, that moment didn't happen on a cliff edge or during a terrifying accident. It happened under the fluorescent lights of a doctor's office in front of a receptionist with pity in her eyes. It happened with the single soul-crushing phrase, "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your card has been declined." A simple inconvenience for most, but for her, it was the declaration of a war she didn't even know had been waged, and the man who had just fired the first shot, her husband. The air in the penthouse was always the same, chilled to a precise 68 degrees, and scented with a custom blend of white tea and fig that cost more per ounce than most people's groceries. It was the smell of wealth of curated perfection. From their 72nd floor perch, overlooking Central Park, New York City, was a silent, sparkling tapestry. A kingdom that Clara Becker Worthington was supposed to feel like a queen of. Instead, most days, she felt like its most well-kept prisoner. Her husband, Richard Worthington, CEO of the tech behemoth Nexus Dynamics, was a man who didn't just live his life. He architected it. Every detail was meticulously planned, from the thread count of their sheets to the exact shade of cream on the walls, a color he dubbed Monet's morning light. Their marriage was his masterpiece. On the surface, it was flawless. They were the golden couple of the New York tech and society scene. Richard, with his sharp Tom Ford suits, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that could disarm senators and secure billion-dollar deals. And Clara, the elegant, supportive wife, always dressed in the latest Oscar de la Renta or Carolina Herrera, her art history degree from Yale. A charming footnote to her primary role as Mrs. Worthington. Their photos were splashed across Vogue and Vanity Fair, pages laughing at the Met Gala, looking serious and philanthropic at the Worthington Foundation Gala, sailing off the coast of St. Bart's. Richard loved the image they projected. Power, stability, old money meets new tech. He often said, "Perception is reality, Clara. We give them the reality they want to see." But the reality Clara lived was one of quiet erosions, a slow, steady chipping away at her own identity, until she was little more than a beautiful, breathing accessory. It hadn't started that way. When she'd met Richard, she was a promising curator at a small but respected Chelsea gallery. She had a sharp eye, a passion for discovering new artists, and a life that was her own. Richard had been a whirlwind, a force of nature who saw her he'd claimed like no one else had. He'd loved her fire, her independence. He'd supported her work, attending her gallery openings and buying pieces from her featured artists. But after the wedding, the support slowly morphed into control, all under the guise of love and protection. "Darling, why stress yourself with the gallery? You don't need to work," he'd murmured one night, massaging her shoulders as she pored over invoices. "Let me take care of you. I want to give you the world." The world, it turned out, meant giving up her job. Then it meant letting his financial team handle her trivial finances. "It's just more efficient, sweetheart. Everything in one place. No need for you to worry your pretty head about it." She was given a credit card, an exclusive black steel card linked to his primary account. At first, it felt like freedom. Unlimited funds. No need to check a balance. But she soon learned it was a leash. Every purchase, from a coffee to a couture gown, was logged and itemized in a monthly report that his personal assistant reviewed. More than once, Richard had casually brought up a purchase in conversation. "Did you enjoy that lunch at Perse with Isabella?" The truffle risotto must have been divine, judging by the bill. The message was clear. "I am always watching." Her friends had dwindled, not because he forbade her from seeing them, but because he made it subtly difficult. Her old art world friends were a bit scruffy for their new social circle. Her college friends were provincial. Her best friend, Isabella Rossi, a razor-sharp corporate lawyer, was the only one who saw through the facade. "He's building a cage," Clara Isabella had warned her over lunch a year ago, her voice low. "It's a beautiful gilded cage, but it's still a cage." "Do you even have your own bank account anymore?" Clara had flushed with defensiveness. "Richard takes care of everything. It's easier that way." Isabella had just shaken her head, her dark eyes filled with concern. "It's never easier to give up your power, honey. It's just easier for him." Now Clara was living the truth of Isabella's words. The silence in their marriage had grown cavernous. Richard was consumed with the launch of Nexus Dynamics' new flagship product, Aura, a revolutionary AI-driven home integration system. He spent weeks in Palo Alto, leaving Clara alone in the silent fig-scented penthouse. The loneliness was a physical ache, a hollowness that no amount of shopping or charity work could fill, which brought her to today. The appointment. The topic of children had been a delicate, painful dance for the past 3 years. Richard wanted an heir, a successor to the Worthington Empire. It was the one piece of his architected life that was missing. He spoke of their future son. It was always a son, as if he were a foregone conclusion. But nature had not complied with Richard Worthington's 5-year plan. After a year of trying with no success, Richard had decreed they would see the best fertility specialist in the country, Dr. Lena Hansen. It was Clara who had to endure the endless tests, the hormonal injections, the invasive procedures. Richard was too busy, too important. He'd provided his sample with the detached efficiency of a man making a deposit at a bank and considered his part done. The pressure, the stress, the blame, all of it, landed squarely on Clara's shoulders. This morning's appointment was a follow-up to her latest round of tests. The air between them at breakfast had been thick with unspoken resentment. Richard had been scrolling through his tablet, his brow furrowed as he read the pre-market reports from the Tokyo Stock Exchange. "Do you have to go today?" he'd asked, not looking up. "I have back-to-back calls with the board. The Aura launch is critical." "Yes, Richard. It's the follow-up with Dr. Hansen. We discussed this," Clara said, her voice tighter than she intended. He finally looked at her, his blue eyes as cold and remote as a winter sky. "Just have her assistant send me the report. I'll have my team review it." "My team?" The word stung. This wasn't a business acquisition. It was their life. It was her body. "I think you should be there, and I think you're being overly emotional," he'd snapped, folding his napkin and placing it on the table. A signal that the conversation was over. "I'm building an empire, Clara. For us, for our future family. All I ask is a little support and a little less drama." He'd stood up, leaned down to kiss the air beside her cheek, and walked out without another word. The scent of his expensive cologne, a mix of sandalwood and entitlement, lingered long after he was gone. Now sitting in the back of the chauffeured Maybach as it purred through Manhattan traffic, Clara felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The car was another of Richard's gifts. She hadn't driven herself in years. He'd insisted on a driver for safety and convenience. She knew it was for control. She couldn't just go wherever she wanted. Every trip was logged, every destination known. She clutched her Hermès clutch, the smooth leather, doing little to soothe her frayed nerves. Inside was the black card, her lifeline, her leash. The appointment with Dr. Hansen wasn't just about fertility anymore. It was about her health. The stress of her life with Richard was taking a physical toll. She'd been having dizzy spells and heart palpitations. She hadn't told Richard. He would have dismissed it as more of her drama. The Maybach pulled up to the curb in front of a discreet, elegant brownstone on the Upper East Side that housed Dr. Hansen's private practice. "I will be back in 1 hour, Robert," she told the driver, trying to sound confident. "Yes, Mrs. Worthington." As she walked toward the heavy oak doors, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. She was walking into a consultation about creating a new life, but she felt as if her own was slipping away, bit by bit, purchase by purchase, dismissal by dismissal. She was living in a gilded cage, and she was beginning to fear the doors had been locked for good. Dr. Hansen's office was the antithesis of Clara's penthouse. It was warm and inviting with soft lighting, plush armchairs, and walls adorned with vibrant, hopeful art pieces Clara recognized from up-and-coming artists she would have once championed. Dr. Hansen herself was a woman in her late 50s with kind, intelligent eyes and a calming presence. She didn't treat Clara like the wife of a billionaire. She treated her like a person. Clara. "It's good to see you," she said, gesturing for her to sit. "Though I wish Richard could have joined us. The new product launch is all-consuming," Clara replied, the excuse tasting like ash in her mouth. Dr. Hansen gave a knowing, gentle nod. "Of course. Well, let's go over your results." She pulled up a file on her computer screen, her expression turning serious. "Physically, you are in perfect health. All your levels are normal. But I want to talk about something else. Your cortisol levels." She turned the screen toward Clara. It was a chart with a jagged red line that was alarmingly high. Cortisol is the body's primary stress hormone. In a healthy person, it fluctuates. Yours are chronically elevated. This is the kind of level I see in first responders or people in active combat zones. "Clara, what's going on in your life?" The question was so direct, so compassionate, that it shattered Clara's carefully constructed composure. The tears she had been holding back for months, for years, began to well up. I don't know," she stammered, hating the weakness in her voice. "Everything is supposed to be perfect." "Supposed to be?" Dr. Hansen probed gently. Chronic stress can have a significant impact on fertility. It can disrupt hormone regulation and create an environment that is inhospitable to conception. Forget the injections and the procedures for a moment. I'm more concerned about you, Clara. Your well-being. This level of stress is not sustainable. It's a tremendous burden on your heart, your immune system, on your entire body. They talked for nearly an hour. For the first time, Clara spoke honestly about the crushing loneliness, the constant feeling of being watched and managed, the subtle ways Richard made her feel small and inconsequential. She didn't paint him as a monster, but as a man so obsessed with control that he was suffocating her. Dr. Hansen listened without judgment, offering not platitudes but real medical concern. "Clara," she said finally, her tone firm but kind. "We can continue with the treatments, but I strongly advise you to seek therapy for yourself. You need an outlet. You need to address this stress at its source. A baby isn't a solution to an unhappy environment. It's a life that deserves to enter a peaceful one." Walking out of the consultation room, Clara felt strangely lighter, as if a great pressure had been momentarily lifted. Someone saw her. Someone understood. The validation was a balm on her raw nerves. She felt a flicker of her old self, the competent, confident woman who could handle anything. She approached the polished mahogany reception desk. A pleasant young woman smiled at her. "That will be $5,200 for today's consultation and lab work, Mrs. Worthington. A routine transaction." Clara opened her clutch, pulled out the heavy black steel card, and handed it over. She'd used it for purchases 10 times that amount, without a second thought. The receptionist swiped it. A soft beep. She frowned and swiped it again. Another beep. A flush began to creep up Clara's neck. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said, her professional smile faltering. "It's not going through. Do you have another form of payment?" "That's impossible," Clara said, her voice a little too loud. Try it again. The chip, maybe. The woman tried the chip. The small screen on the terminal flashed red. Card declined. Contact issuer. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Clara's brief moment of clarity. This had never happened before. Never. There must be some mistake, she insisted, her heart starting to pound against her ribs in a frantic rhythm. It's an unlimited card. The receptionist's eyes were wide with a mixture of confusion and pity, the exact look Clara dreaded most. A woman in a Chanel suit in the waiting area glanced over, her curiosity piqued. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave that washed over Clara's face. "I'm really sorry, Mrs. Worthington," the receptionist whispered, leaning forward. "It says the account holder has suspended the card." The account holder. Richard. The world tilted on its axis. He'd done this. He had deliberately, coldly cut her off. On the day of her fertility appointment. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. A punishment for the argument that morning, for daring to ask for his presence, for being an emotional inconvenience while he was building his empire. Her hands trembled as she fumbled in her clutch for her phone. She didn't have another card. She didn't have cash. Richard had called carrying large amounts of cash vulgar. The black card was all she had. It was all he allowed her to have. She found his name in her contacts and pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, a third time. She could picture him in his glass-walled office, seeing her name on his screen and deliberately ignoring it. Finally, he picked up. "Clara, I'm in a meeting." His voice was clipped impatient. "Richard, my card was declined," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "Here at Dr. Hansen's. They said you suspended it." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't a silence of confusion. It was a silence of confirmation. It was the silence of power. "Did I?" he said, his voice smooth and utterly devoid of warmth. "Strange. Perhaps you should be more careful with your spending, Clara. Things are tight with the Aura launch. Every penny counts." It was the most ludicrous lie she had ever heard. Nexus Dynamics was worth over $500 billion. Tight was not a word in Richard Worthington's vocabulary. This was purely sadistically about putting her in her place. "Richard, please," she begged the word, tasting like poison. "I'm at the reception desk. This is humiliating." "Well," he said, and she could almost hear the cruel smirk in his voice. "Perhaps it's a valuable lesson in fiscal responsibility. I have to go. We'll discuss it when I get back from Palo Alto." The line went dead. She stood there, phone in her hand, the dial tone buzzing in her ear. The receptionist was looking at her, her face a mask of professional sympathy. The woman in the Chanel suit was now openly staring. Clara felt naked, exposed, stripped bare in the most brutal way imaginable. He hadn't just blocked a card. He had announced to the world, or at least this small, exclusive corner of it, that she was nothing. She had no money, no power, no agency of her own. She was entirely dependent on his whim, and he had just shown her how easily he could turn it off. Just as the full, crushing weight of it was about to bring her to her knees, Dr. Hansen emerged from her office, having heard the commotion. She took in the scene in an instant, Clara's white face, the receptionist's distress. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her calm voice cutting through the tension. Her card was declined," the receptionist stammered. Clara wanted the floor to swallow her whole. But Dr. Hansen simply walked to the desk, put a reassuring hand on Clara's arm, and spoke to the receptionist. "It's fine, Sarah. Send the invoice to my personal accounting. We'll sort it out later." She then turned to Clara, her eyes full of a deep, sorrowful understanding. "Clara, let me call you a cab." "My driver," Clara started to say, then stopped. The driver worked for Richard. Taking the Maybach would be another form of capitulation, another acceptance of his control. "No," Clara said, a new, unfamiliar strength hardening her voice. "A cab would be wonderful, thank you." The ride home, in a rattling yellow taxi, a vehicle she hadn't been in for a decade, was a study in contrasts. Outside, the city bustled with life, people hurrying along the sidewalks, living their own independent lives. Inside, Clara felt like a ghost. The humiliation at the clinic had burned away the last vestiges of her denial. This wasn't a partnership. It was a dictatorship. The gilded cage was real, and the door had just been slammed shut and locked. But as the taxi crossed 59th Street, something else began to burn alongside the shame rage. A cold, clear, incandescent rage. Richard wanted to teach her a lesson. Fine. She was about to teach him one, too. When Clara walked into the silent, scent-controlled penthouse, it felt alien, like a museum of a life that was no longer hers. The floor-to-ceiling windows that once seemed to offer a view of the world now felt like the glass walls of a fishbowl. She walked past the abstract paintings Richard had chosen, the sterile designer furniture, and the framed photos of their perfect life. In every photo she was smiling, but now all she could see was the hostage-like quality in her eyes. She didn't cry. The tears had been cauterized by the white-hot fury that was now coursing through her veins. He thought he could humiliate her, strip her of her dignity, and leave her powerless. He thought she would just sit here in their perfect prison, waiting for him to return from Palo Alto and benevolently restore her privileges. He had fundamentally misunderstood the woman he had married, the woman he had tried so hard to erase. He had forgotten she had a voice. Her first and only call was to Isabella. "Izzy," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Can you come over? Something's happened." Isabella, who could read Clara's moods better than anyone, detected the steel beneath the quiet. "On my way. Don't do anything until I get there." An hour later, Isabella blew into the penthouse like a hurricane of righteous indignation. She wore a sharp black power suit and an expression that could curdle milk. She'd already cancelled 3 client meetings. Clara recounted the entire day, from the conversation with Dr. Hansen about her stress levels to the final brutal phone call with Richard. She spoke without emotion, her voice flat and precise, laying out the facts as if she were a witness describing a crime. Which in a way she was. When she finished, Isabella was silent for a full minute, her jaw tight. "That sociopathic son of a bitch." She finally breathed, her voice low and dangerous. "This isn't just cruel, Clara. This is calculated. This is coercive control. It's a classic textbook tactic of abuse. He's isolating you, controlling your access to resources. He did this to break you." "I know," Clara said simply. "Okay." Isabella went into lawyer mode, pacing the vast living room. "Okay, we have options. We file for divorce. We get a forensic accountant to go through his finances. We can prove financial abuse. It will be messy, it will be public, and he will fight dirty. He'll use his PR machine to paint you as an unstable gold-digging shrew." Clara shook her head. "He controls the narrative, Izzy. He always has. His team will leak stories. They'll twist everything. I'll be the crazy wife of the beloved tech genius." No one will believe me. So what do we do? Isabella asked, stopping in front of her. What do you want to do? Clara looked up, and for the first time that day, Isabella saw a fire in her eyes she hadn't seen since before Richard. It was the look of the old Clara, the gallery curator, who could spot a masterpiece in a dusty pile of canvases. I want to tell the truth, Clara said, but I want to tell it my way, before he can twist it, before his PR team can spin it. I want to burn his narrative to the ground. A slow smile spread across Isabella's face. You want to get ahead of him. You want to set the battlefield. I want to blow it up, Clara corrected. He built his entire empire on a carefully crafted image of benevolence and integrity. A family man, a visionary. His company Nexus Dynamics sells Aura, a system that's all about trust and integration into the home. What happens when the world finds out that the man selling them a key to their perfect home uses his own to lock his wife in a cage? Isabella's smile widened. Oh, this is good. This is very, very good. So how do we do it? A tell-all with the New York Times? No, Clara said immediately. They'll filter it, edit it, frame it their way. This needs to be my voice. Unfiltered, unedited, raw. She walked over to her laptop, a sleek device Richard had bought her. She opened it, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. I used to have a blog, years ago, before Richard. It was called The Gilded Frame. I wrote about art life, finding beauty in unexpected places. I haven't touched it in years, but I still own the domain. Clara, are you sure? Isabella asked, her voice turning serious. Once you do this, there's no going back. You will detonate a bomb in the middle of your life. And his. My life was detonated this morning at a reception desk on the Upper East Side. Clara said, her voice ringing with newfound clarity. This is just me picking up the trigger. For the next 4 hours, the penthouse became a war room. Isabella ordered Thai food, while Clara wrote. The words poured out of her a torrent of truth that had been dammed up for a decade. She wrote with a precision and eloquence that came from years of suppressed intelligence. She didn't rant. She didn't sling mud. She simply told her story. She started with the scene at the doctor's office, describing the clinical details the receptionist's pity, the cold finality of the words, card suspended. She named the clinic, she named the doctor, not to implicate them, but to ground the story in undeniable fact. Then she pulled back the curtain on their marriage. She wrote about giving up her career, about the slow, insidious transfer of her financial independence. She detailed the casual remarks about her, spending the way he used the black card as both a reward and a leash. She wrote about the loneliness, the isolation, the constant pressure to be perfect. She wrote about the fertility treatments, her body being poked and prodded for an heir to an empire she had no stake in. She was careful and deliberate. She used his own language, his corporate speak, against him. She called his actions a hostile takeover of her life. She referred to his control as a feature, not a bug, of their marriage. She was leveraging his own brand against him. Isabella, reading over her shoulder, acted as a legal and strategic editor. Good use, that phrase, coercive control. It has a legal weight, she'd say. Or, don't just say he was dismissive, give the exact quote. A little less drama, Clara. Perfect. It makes him sound like a condescending prick. The final piece was a masterstroke of narrative warfare. Clara titled it simply, My husband is Richard Worthington. Yesterday, He blocked my card at my fertility appointment. The title was a heat-seeking missile aimed directly at the heart of his public image. It was specific, shocking, and impossible to ignore. As she attached a photo to the post, not one of the glossy Vanity Fair shots, but a candid photo a friend had taken years ago of her in her old gallery, laughing, her face vibrant and full of life, a stark contrast to the hollowed-out socialite she had become. A wave of fear washed over her. This was it, the point of no return. "Are you ready?" Isabella asked softly, her hand on Clara's shoulder. Clara took a deep, shuddering breath. She thought of the woman in the Chanel suit. She thought of Dr. Hansen's kind eyes. She thought of Richard's cold, smug voice on the phone. She thought of the life she had lost and the woman she had almost forgotten. "Yes," she said. Her finger hovered over the mouse. She looked at Isabella, who gave her a firm, determined nod. Click. The post was live. For a moment, there was only silence in the vast, empty penthouse. Then Isabella's phone buzzed, and again, and again. She had shared the link on her private social media. Clara closed the laptop. She didn't want to watch the numbers, the shares, the comments. Not yet. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the city lights. They didn't look like a sparkling tapestry anymore. They looked like a million possibilities, a million different lives. For the first time in a decade, she felt like one of them could be hers. The cage door was open. She had just set fire to the cage itself. The internet does not sleep, and it does not forgive. Clara's post didn't just make a splash. It was a digital tsunami. It started as these things do, in small, concentrated ripples. Isabella's network of powerful female lawyers and executives in New York saw it first. They were women who understood the subtleties of power misogyny and the gilded cages that still existed even in the 21st century. They shared it with fury, adding their own commentary. This is what coercive control looks like. I've seen this happen to friends. Bravo for her courage. Within an hour, the ripples hit the tech world. A journalist from TechCrunch, known for her sharp critiques of Silicon Valley's toxic bro culture, posted the link on X, formerly Twitter. Her post went viral. The carefully curated image of Nexus Dynamics CEO Richard Worthington is taking a major hit tonight. And it's coming from inside the house. By midnight, Clara's story was the #1 trending topic in the United States. Stand with Clara was born, and it was a wildfire. Clara and Isabella watched, huddled on the white sofa that Richard had picked out a laptop open between them. They were no longer in the penthouse. They were in the eye of a hurricane they had summoned. Clara's blog. A dormant site that had previously received maybe a dozen hits a month had crashed twice from the traffic. Isabella had to call a web developer friend in a panic to get it moved to a dedicated server. The comments section was a deluge of human emotion. Thousands of women shared their own stories of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and losing themselves in a relationship. "Thank you for giving this a name," one wrote. "My ex did this to me for years, but I just thought he was bad with money. He was controlling me." Another said, "I'm a stay-at-home mum. This is my biggest fear. You've inspired me to open my own bank account tomorrow." Of course there was vitriol. Anonymous accounts, likely Richard's sycophants or paid trolls, flooded the comments with accusations. She was a gold digger, a liar, an opportunist trying to extort a rich man. But for every hateful comment, there were 100 messages of support, drowning out the noise with a powerful chorus of solidarity. The mainstream media caught on with a speed that was dizzying. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, Forbes, every major outlet was reporting on it. They couldn't just ignore it. Clara had been too smart. She hadn't made vague accusations. She had provided specific, verifiable details: the doctor's appointment, the public humiliation, the direct quotes. Her story was layered with the kind of authentic detail that is difficult to fabricate and easy to believe. The photo she'd chosen was a stroke of genius. Juxtaposed against the story of a broken, controlled woman, were the images the media outlets pulled from Getty Images: Clara and Richard at Gala's hymn, with his arm possessively around her. Her with a smile that now looked strained and hollow. The contrast was devastating. Somewhere over the Pacific, on a private jet flying back from Asia, Richard Worthington was in the middle of a celebratory champagne toast with his executive team. The Aura pre-launch in Tokyo had been a staggering success. He was on top of the world. When the jet's Wi-Fi connected as they approached US airspace, his phone exploded. It wasn't with messages of congratulations. It was a flood of panicked texts and emails from his chief communications officer, Marcus Thorne. Urgent. Call me now. We have a 5-alarm fire. Clara. The board is asking for a statement. What the hell is going on? Richard, annoyed, opened the first link Marcus sent him. It was to Clara's blog post. He read the title, and the blood drained from his face. He read the first paragraph, then the second. The champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the cabin floor. His executives fell silent, watching him. His face, usually a mask of calm authority, was contorted with a mixture of disbelief and pure, undiluted rage. She wouldn't dare. But she had. By the time his jet touched down at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, Nexus Dynamics stock was already in freefall in after-hours trading. The story wasn't just about a messy divorce anymore. It was about the character and integrity of its CEO. A man who sold a product based on domestic trust was now being publicly accused of domestic tyranny. The irony was not lost on Wall Street. Marcus Thorne was waiting for him on the tarmac, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. "We have to get ahead of this, Richard," he said, skipping any pleasantries. "We need a statement. We need to frame her as unstable, grieving the fact she can't have kids lashing out. She's not unstable, she's a viper." Richard seethed, storming towards his waiting car. "I give her everything, a perfect life, and this is how she repays me." "The world doesn't see it that way right now," Marcus shot back, his voice strained with panic. "Right now, they see a billionaire who cut off his wife's credit card while she was at a fertility clinic. It's a PR nightmare of epic proportions. We have to discredit her now." They crafted a statement that evening, one that would go down in the annals of public relations disasters. It was released exclusively to a friendly journalist at a major business publication. While this is a deeply painful and private family matter, the statement read, "Mr. Worthington is saddened by his wife's latest public outburst. He has always and will continue to support Clara through her emotional and physical challenges. It is his hope that she will seek the help she so clearly needs, and that their privacy will be respected during this difficult time." It was classic gaslighting, and the public saw right through it. The phrase "her emotional and physical challenges" was interpreted as a callous reference to their infertility struggles, a move that backfired spectacularly. Commentators and the public alike labeled it as victim blaming of the highest order. A prominent female senator from California tweeted, "The statement from Richard Worthington's team is a masterclass in how not to respond to allegations of abuse. It's condescending, dismissive, and frankly disgusting. I stand with Clara." The fallout was swift and brutal. The board of Nexus Dynamics, a collection of powerful figures who cared more about shareholder value than their CEO's marital problems, called an emergency meeting. A major pension fund, which held a massive stake in the company, issued a public statement expressing deep concern over the leadership and governance at Nexus. A group of female engineers at Nexus Dynamics anonymously leaked an internal letter to the press detailing a corporate culture that sidelined women, making Clara's story feel like a reflection of a systemic problem. Back in the penthouse, Clara watched it all unfold. She hadn't left. She was staying in the belly of the beast. It was her home, bought with the profits of a company built while she had sacrificed her own life. She wasn't going to be forced out. Isabella was her gatekeeper, fielding the hundreds of emails and calls pouring in. Gloria Allred's office had called. So had the producers of Good Morning America, The Today Show, and 60 Minutes. Clara wasn't ready for that. Not yet. For now, she was watching the man who had tried to silence her be deafened by the roar of a world that was finally listening. He had controlled every aspect of her life for a decade. But in one night, she had seized control of the one thing he valued most, his story. He had made her feel small, invisible, and powerless. But standing there, looking at the news alerts lighting up her phone, Clara Becker Worthington had never felt bigger or more powerful in her entire life. The firestorm was raging, and she was the one who had struck the match. The 24 hours after Richard's disastrous PR statement were a blur of strategy and caffeine. The penthouse, once a symbol of her confinement, had become Clara's fortress. She and Isabella had barely slept, fueled by a potent cocktail of righteous fury, black coffee, and the endless stream of supportive messages that continued to pour in from around the globe. Clara had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed, a cold, clear-eyed resolve forged in the crucible of public humiliation. She was no longer just the woman who had been wronged. She was the architect of a rebellion. Isabella, in her element, had transformed the minimalist living room into a command center. Her laptop was open to a secure video conference with two of her firm's most ruthless litigators. Stacks of documents were beginning to appear on the marble coffee table. They were methodically planning the legal assault that would accompany the public one. "He's going to come here," Clara said, her voice steady. She stood by the window, watching the morning light glint off the buildings below. She had showered and dressed, not in one of the couture outfits Richard had chosen for her, but in a simple pair of black trousers and a cream-colored silk blouse. It was her own armor. He won't be able to resist a direct confrontation. He needs to re-establish control. "Let him come," Isabella said, a shark's smile playing on her lips. She ended her video call. "We're ready for him. The petition for divorce is drafted. We're filing on grounds of irreconcilable differences with a supplementary petition citing extreme cruelty and a pattern of coercive control. And I have a process server on standby 5 minutes from here." "Will it be enough?" Clara asked, turning from the window. "He has an army of lawyers. An army that's busy dealing with the SEC inquiries that are about to pop up thanks to that stock dive," Isabella countered. "We're not fighting him on his terms. We're not just arguing about money. We're arguing about conduct. His conduct. It's a different game, and he doesn't know the rules yet." The chime of the private elevator echoed through the penthouse shortly after noon. It was a sound that used to make Clara's stomach clench with anxiety. Today she felt nothing but a grim sense of readiness. The elevator doors opened, and Richard stormed in. He looked like a thundercloud in a bespoke suit. His face was pale, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle jumped near his temple. His usually perfect hair was slightly askew, as if he'd been running his hands through it in frustration. He wasn't alone. His communications chief, Marcus Thorne, scurried in behind him looking terrified. Richard's cold blue eyes scanned the room and landed on Clara. The sheer force of his rage was a palpable thing. "What have you done?" He snarled, his voice a low growl. He took a step toward her, but stopped when Isabella moved to stand directly at Clara's side. "Don't you dare take another step, Richard," Isabella said, her voice calm and lethally sharp. "This is between my wife and me." He spat, his glare fixed on Clara. "Get out of my home, Isabella. It's her home too, Richard, and I'm her legal counsel." "I'm not going anywhere," Isabella replied smoothly. "Anything you say can and will be documented." Richard ignored her, his eyes boring into Clara's. He tried the tactic that had always worked before, utter dismissive contempt. "Do you have any idea of the damage you've caused to the company? To our life? For what? Because of some petty tantrum over a credit card. You've destroyed everything, you hysterical, ungrateful woman." The old Clara would have flinched. She would have crumpled. The new Clara stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "I didn't destroy anything." "Richard," she said, her voice devoid of the emotion he expected, "I just described what you had already broken. Your company's stock isn't down because of my blog post. It's down because the world saw the man behind the curtain, and they didn't like what they saw. It turns out that a man who bullies his wife isn't someone people trust to run a multi-billion-dollar company." The directness of her response seemed to momentarily stun him. He had expected tears, apologies, fear. He was met with cold, hard logic. "This is absurd," he stammered, turning to Marcus as if for support, but Marcus was staring at his shoes. "I gave you a perfect life. You gave me a cage," Clara shot back, taking a step forward herself. "A beautiful, expensive cage, but a cage nonetheless. You didn't want a wife. You wanted a living ornament for your perfect life. You wanted an incubator for your perfect heir. You monitored my spending. You isolated me from my friends. You dismissed my feelings, and then you tried to publicly humiliate me to teach me a lesson. The lesson is over, Richard. Class is dismissed." Richard's face contorted with fury. "You will regret this for the rest of your life. Our prenup is ironclad. You signed it. You'll walk away with nothing. I will make sure of it. I'll drag your name through the mud until no one in this city will even look at you." This was the moment Isabella had been waiting for. She held up a hand. "About that prenup, Richard. We should talk." She gestured to the sofa. "Please have a seat." Richard looked as if he'd rather swallow glass. But something in Isabella's tone, a confidence that bordered on predatory, made him hesitate, and then reluctantly, he sat. Marcus hovered nervously behind him. "Your prenup has a standard severability clause and a duress clause." Isabella began picking up a document from the table. "But my firm believes we can make a compelling case that the entire agreement is voidable. You see, a contract requires a meeting of the minds and good faith from both parties. We will argue that your decade-long pattern of coercive control, culminating in the public act of financial abuse, constitutes a fundamental breach of the marital contract and indicates the prenuptial agreement was signed under fraudulent inducement, that you never intended a partnership, only a controlled acquisition of a spouse." Richard laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. No judge will ever buy that." "Won't they?" Isabella countered. "Public opinion is a powerful thing, Richard, and right now it's not on your side." We have Dr. Hansen's testimony about Clara's chronic stress levels. We have itemized records of you tracking her every purchase. We have dozens of women from your own company who are ready to testify about the toxic, misogynistic culture you fostered. This isn't just a divorce case anymore. It's a referendum on you. We'll subject your entire life, every email, every text, every financial transaction to discovery. Are you sure you want that? The color was draining from Richard's face. He was a man who lived in the shadows of corporate loopholes and NDAs. The idea of total public exposure was his worst nightmare. Just as he was about to retort, Isabella's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her expression changed. A flicker of genuine surprise, followed by a slow, triumphant smile. "Excuse me for one moment," she said. She answered the phone, turning away slightly. "Daniel, what a pleasure to hear from you." Yes, I can see how that would be relevant." "That's fascinating. In a series of offshore accounts, you say, 'to avoid.'" "Yes, of course. I would very much like to see that documentation. My email is..." "Thank you, Daniel. I'll be in touch." She hung up and turned back to Richard. The air in the room had shifted. Clara could feel it. Richard felt it too. He looked wary, like an animal that has just scented a new unknown predator. "Who was that?" he demanded. "Just an old friend," Isabella said casually. "Daniel Petrov. You remember him, don't you, your former CFO? The one you fired 5 years ago, when he started asking too many questions about your executive bonus structures. He seems to think you've been systematically hiding marital assets in a series of shell corporations based in the Cayman Islands, assets that you failed to disclose during the signing of your ironclad prenup. That Richard isn't just grounds for voiding a contract. That's fraud, and I believe the SEC and the IRS will be very, very interested in Daniel's documentation. It was a kill shot. The final devastating blow." Richard Worthington, the master architect, had been completely outmaneuvered. His face was a mask of pure shock, followed by the dawning horror of total ruin. He had been so focused on Clara, on the domestic battle, that he had forgotten about the corporate skeletons in his closet. He stared at Clara, a new, desperate look in his eyes. The rage was gone, replaced by a raw, pleading panic. "Clara, we can fix this. You and I. We can... I'll give you whatever you want. A new card. A separate allowance. Just call this off. Retract the story. Tell them you were distraught. It was the plea of a defeated man. Not a plea for forgiveness, but a plea for survival." He wasn't seeing her, his wife. He was seeing the woman who held the power to destroy him utterly. Clara looked at him, at the shell of the titan who had dominated her life for a decade, and felt not pity, but a profound sense of release. "No, Richard," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "There's nothing to fix. This was never about the money." She glanced at Isabella, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. As if on cue, there was a polite knock on the penthouse door. Isabella walked over and opened it to reveal a nondescript man in a suit holding a legal envelope. "Richard Worthington?" the man asked politely. Richard just stared, mute. "He is Isabella, confirmed." The man stepped forward and held out the envelope. "You've been served." He placed the envelope on the marble coffee table in front of Richard, turned and left. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing the silence in the room. The divorce papers sat there, a white flag of surrender on a battlefield Clara had just conquered. Richard didn't even look at them. He just stared at Clara, his empire crumbling around him in the silent, fig-scented air. Later that evening, After Richard and a shell-shocked Marcus Thorne had departed, Isabella's phone rang again. It was a producer from Anderson Cooper 360. "They want you, Clara," Isabella said, covering the mouthpiece. "Prime time. No questions off limits. This is it. This is your chance to tell the whole world in your own voice." Clara looked out the window at the city, no longer a tapestry, but a real place full of real people, real struggles, and real hope. The blog post was the first shot. The confrontation was winning the battle. This interview would be winning the war. "Tell them yes," Clara said affamala, eye in her eyes that no one could ever extinguish again. "I'm ready." In the end, Clara's story did more than just break the internet. It broke the silence. It became a cultural touchstone, a reference point for a conversation that society was desperate to have about the hidden nature of coercive control and emotional abuse. Her single blog post launched 1,000 others, empowering countless individuals to speak their own truths. Richard Worthington was forced to step down as CEO, his carefully constructed legacy shattered by the one person he thought he had under complete control. Clara, with the support of a world she never knew she had fought for, and won a divorce settlement that was not just about money, but about justice. She used a portion of it to create the Gilded Frame Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping victims of domestic financial abuse reclaim their independence. Her story wasn't just a fleeting viral moment. It became a movement. If Clara's journey from a silent victim to a powerful voice resonated with you, please share this video. You truly never know who is out there feeling alone in their own gilded cage, needing to hear that they have the power to break free. Like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories that matter, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Your share could be the key that unlocks someone else's door.